choice I was given was go into the city or into the bush. Now, I had been living in central London, so the idea of the city didn't appeal. So I thought, well, I have no idea what the bush is at all. I didn't know, and I was just told to bring a backpack and a sleeping bag and a foamy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Webcast. As always, I am one of your Webcast podcast hosts. I am Dr. Shauna Pandya, a Canadian physician with an interest in rural and extreme environments and in space medicine. And today we have a very special edition of Webcast with you. Today I have a fellow EC50 with me. So EC50 recognizes Explorers Club members who are doing amazing world-changing things that you should know about. So today with me, I have Dr. Alicia Colman coming into us from London. And she is one of the EC50 for 2022. And her work is in archaeology and ethnohistory. So she is an archaeologist and ethnohistorian by background, working with competing scientists. She has collaborated with Indigenous peoples, NGOs, and governments in Canada, the UK, US, and Antigua. Her mission is to help us better understand our past. Her expeditions have taken us to Namibia, Iceland, and beyond. She practices citizen science. She has published extensively, and today we're going to have a conversation about where her expeditions have led her, what she has learned, how she got into this, and especially a focused discussion on mindsets and understanding each other. So Alicia, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you.
Hi, welcome everyone, and welcome Shauna. It's great to see you and chat. I'll see, I mean visibly talk, that's what I mean. But it's good to chat. I'm looking forward to it.
This is going to be great. So Alicia, you have such a wonderful and storied background, but your background is also quite unique. Not everyone is an ethnohistorian. Not everyone has done the work that you have done. So can you tell us, is this something that you knew you wanted to do from the start? Did you grow up when you were a child saying, hey, I want to be an ethnohistorian, or what led you to this path?
Actually, what was funny, I grew up wanting, my dad is a historian, my mother's an anthropologist. I grew up thinking, you guys spend time in archives and you do talk to people, but I'm not sure about the archive because they're dusty. I don't know if you've ever been to them. And I figured I'd like to do something outside, and I thought archaeology looks interesting. But I didn't pick up the ethnohistory until I was doing my PhD. My supervisor, I met him, and he said, well, it was the first time I met him. I'd already applied, and I'd got in. And the first thing he said was like, I think you should do ethnohistory like me. And I was thinking, oh, okay. I like history. It sounds different. Well, but as you know, when your PhD supervisor suggests something, you generally go, what?
Not really a suggestion, is it?
No, not really. But actually, I think he pretty much knew I liked reading historical documents, and I was interested in sort of dealing in that gap between archaeology and history, and up to today.
And so let's talk about that.
So I made sense. Okay, fine, I'll go along with you. You are my PhD supervisor, and you will be marking my work.
Exactly. So you're voluntold essentially to become an ethnohistorian.
Yeah.
And so for those of us who don't really aren't familiar with the term, can you explain to us what exactly it means to be an ethnohistorian?
What it really means is you're dealing with going from the archaeological record and the historical record, and you're dealing with sort of the area where you've got not necessarily much documentation in the sense that we're from the first world or tradition as the academic world, where we're used to written documents. It might be oral histories. It might be, financial records written by the likes of the Hudson Bay Archives. So you're looking at photographic records, or people who've sat around campfires, and we all as explorers, explorer types, and put in quotes, like sitting around chatting. But actually, we're talking, we're retelling information. So it's listening to a lot of oral information and picking out the bits, trying to reconstruct the past of the past. It's not necessarily written down, so it's not summarized, it's not on a shelf. Does that help?
That's very helpful. So it sounds like it's very much there's oral tradition plays a part in it, and also speaking to people for whom this has been, their
Yes.
culture and tradition.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
this sounds like it involves a lot of face-to-face work, definitely not the dusty archives that you may have been thinking of as a historian when you first started down this path. And you had mentioned that background in archaeology. So at what point did you start going into the field, into what we would consider austere environments? Was this early on in your career? Was it later in your PhD?
No, I had actually already started I was already an archaeologist when I started becoming an ethnohistorian. So I had started doing field work as an archaeologist, as an undergrad in those sort of after field school, which was in the first year. And so we had to do 84 days of field work according to the UCL. So it meant that I suddenly realized, oh crumbs, I have to do some field work, and I rang up a family friend, actually, of my grandfather's, who jokingly said, oh, would you like a job? You should bring me up. And I think he thought he was flippant, but I was just like, oh, I'm completely disorganized. Something you don't, in retrospect, I'm like, I can't believe, now I am so concerned with organization. But back then I was like, I didn't even think about it. And it was really quite late, and it was near the end of the first year. And I was like, I'm supposed to be doing field work. What have I done? So I rang him up and said, hi, do you remember? You said that a couple of years ago. And I think he was in central Canada, and he's like, oh, this English person has rung me up. So
well, you had a charming British accent, so of course he had to say yes.
Yeah, probably. That's what you could say now. But so that's what happened. But I had already been going with my parents when they did field work. So I had a good idea what field work was like. And I had lived in Brazil when my dad went there to teach. And so I had a good idea what fieldwork was from different perspectives, obviously. Yeah.
So you'd been in the field prior. And so before taking down the academic path, where did your expeditions with your parents take you prior to this becoming part of your career?
I lived in Brazil for 2 years. That was really, I thought at the time it was normal, but I realized actually now I know it isn't. But, you're small, so you don't really realize that. And I went to school there, and then I came back to England, but then we proceeded to go to Portugal for 4 months a year. And so drive through France and Spain, and then there, and then my parents were doing field work again, and research. So it was just, seemed to me quite normal. That's what you did. And so everyone I met who was a kid or a teenager, that's what your parents did. But in now I'm like, no, that really wasn't normal.
Isn't that so funny how, the only universe, as a kid is what you grow up with. So no matter how out there it is, for you, it's like, oh, everyone just does that.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, well, of course everyone does their homework in English and everything else is in another language. And now I'm like, no. But but that's what it was.
And
so I like the idea. Yeah, I like the idea of meeting other people and realizing there are different worlds and saying, how do you consider this? Why do you think that way? So for me, it was like quite normal.
It was a natural transition to make this part of your academic career, it seems.
Yeah.
So your upbringing was quite international. Did I read somewhere that you speak 4 languages? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
What do you speak?
I speak, English as we're speaking now. I speak French. I speak Brazilian Portuguese, and I speak Portuguese, but I'd say the Spanish. I can understand Italian, and I can respond back, but I can't say anything in Italian, but I can read it, and I can't write it, which is like, oh, I should get down to doing it. I like languages. They were just, I did learn German, but I'm shockingly bad at it. I like being able to talk and understanding that when somebody looks at something or thinks about something or organizes the world, it can be so different. And I just found that really fun. I remember being a kid in southern Portugal where we talk about, oh, the English are here. And it's like, and now I'm like, do you not realize you were English? But I didn't. And we would joke with my friends who all spoke several languages as well. And we're like, oh, and because the thing was in the part of southern Portugal we were in, they would have when you go to a coffee shop or a cafe or sit on the beach and do something, there'd be two menus, one in English and one in Portuguese. And the one in English was like, all the prices were twice as high. So we would get the Portuguese one.
Gotcha.
So it was, and then we would order in Portuguese, and then the waiter or the guy who was serving us, or the lady, and would look at us and go, and we go, and then we'd sort of flip back, we're going to carry on in whatever language we feel like it. And then afterwards they would always say, okay, you guys, and we were like, but this is what everyone does. And now I'm like, no, but we just thought it was normal. So we play these games in languages. You pick you pick the grammar that you want to use, and then you slot all your words from all the other languages in.
So it was almost an adaptive trait to be able to pick up languages that, especially an economic advantage for sure.
Yes.
So I think this is a perfect segue to start talking about your work into understanding other peoples. And it sounds like it started maybe in undergrad with that first field expedition in central Canada. Would you say that that's kind of your segue?
Yeah, I think it probably is, because I knew I was sent, the choice I was given was go into the city or into the bush. And I had been living in central London, so the idea of the city didn't appeal. So I thought, well, I have no idea what the bush is at all. I didn't know. And I was just told to bring a backpack and a sleeping bag and a foamy and some clothes for
so
3
mysterious.
months.
Oh, wow.
So I just turned up in Winnipeg, and I was collected and went to this town called Kenora. And I was like, okay, this is small. I looked on the map. I knew where it was. And then I was told, okay, well, you're going to be going down some river, and we hope you can canoe and swim, and you'll be doing. And I was told exactly what I was doing, and then I didn't know. It was something like I had to go and find and record pictographs, and I met my colleagues, and one of whom was actually Ojibwa, and then it was like, I had knew there were always Indigenous peoples there, but I think because I visited a couple of times before, but I realized that there was another world there. But if you spoke English, you only saw the edges, and it was almost as if there was a parallel world, but you couldn't somehow get in. But you see, the thing was, I kept thinking there must be a way in, and I knew that the several worlds cooperated at the same time, because I'd already seen it in Portugal. I'd seen it in Spain. I'd seen it in these other places. When you spoke another language, you saw this other world, and this other world sort of opened up. So I kept thinking, how come people aren't learning Oji Cree or Ojibwa or Cree? And I could see the language is written about places on the community centers, for example. And I was like, why aren't people learning it the way that we would learn it? Because I learned French at secondary and primary school. So there's this other world there. So it came from the fact that I was accustomed to flipping between languages. And so I was like, why aren't people doing the same thing? Now I know it's a mindset, but at the time it was different. So it was like, okay, there's these other worlds. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's such a keen insight. It's almost as if, it's like unlocking a puzzle. That language is the key to sometimes unlocking connections with individuals, with, your experience with the world, as you just said, through restaurants. And in this case, connecting with other cultures. So with Kenora, can you give us a sense of how remote that is? What part of Manitoba? Is that northern Manitoba? How far is that from Winnipeg?
That's actually just in if you find Winnipeg, then you drive 3.5 hours east of Winnipeg, just into the northern Ontario.
Gotcha.
So, okay, it would be about 7 hours from Thunder Bay, which is on the north shore of Lake Superior. And Kenora's in the north end of Lake of the Woods.
So you're getting remote. You're getting to remote Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's start talking about something that you and I talked about before we started recording. Something that's been really central to your career and your expeditions, whether you've been in, remote Canada, and I'm sure in your other expeditions in Antigua and Namibia. This initial maybe outsider versus insider, this me versus them, until you kind of start unlocking the similarities, and whether that's through language or other means. To me, that seems to be so central to your success as an ethnohistorian, and a really powerful message that so many of our audience will want to understand more about, because we have world travelers to go to every country, every remote location on Earth. So can you talk more about, your insight into connecting with others and what you've noticed?
That's an interesting question. I think I know, for example, if think back to the first time I started fieldwork in Kenora, I realized the language was different, and it was very hard to hear. So I usually try and I know that listening is really important, and it's really hard. You can say you can listen, but are you really listening? And that information can be given to you. For example, you're asking directions, and is it full of information, or how are they explaining? Are they using the maps, or they're talking about? Are they visually? More is visual information more important? So they're saying, oh, it's the third tree on the left, and then you find a house. So I'll try and find some way of trying to find a connection, knowing I'll probably screw up brilliantly, or have the leg, as we say in Britain, I'll just have my leg pulled incredibly. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll be an idiot. I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy with that, because, or is it visual information that's more important than written information, or do I have to say, okay, I really don't know? And I think if you just admit, sometimes it's a case of admitting, I don't know.
That's so powerful.
Because I think sometimes if you've been highly trained in a particular discipline, you're accustomed to being the boss of that information. And so you generally think, oh, I know everything. But actually, as human beings, we can't know everything in the world. And even though I speak several languages, and sometimes I'm more comfortable in Brazilian than I am in English, because there are some concepts that are better expressed. They just don't translate terribly well in English. For example, colors are far better expressed in Brazilian. They've got many more colors than you can, many more ways of saying things. So in English, we'll say blue. We'll have navy blue. We'll have light blue. We'll have dark blue, but we don't have much. And there's loads of other blues, aren't there, really? But we'll say sort of like pale dark blue, but that's not very well. So I try and find ways, usually if I'm going to speak to people who are probably from another group, I'll drop the fact that I'll just say, look, let's try and find some way of communicating.
That's so powerful. And, it also resonates a lot with me. I often like to say that we're speaking English, but we're not speaking the same language. And, you summed it up beautifully in your directions analogy. You can tell me to go 3 blocks north, take a left, and then go 4 blocks east, and then take a right. And I may remember that. But if you tell me, hang a left at the mall and then a right when you hit the first gas station, to me, that's a lot more memorable, whereas other people are wired the exact opposite. So let's take this back into your expedition experience. You grew up being comfortable with other cultures, other people. When you went to Kenora, you did say you kind of initially did feel like a bit like an outsider trying to understand this culture. How did you build that rapport with the community you were working with?
Well, I realized I was actually working with several communities. There was the the people seem to divide themselves by color. So, and I remember being in Brazil, and in Brazil, color wasn't, everyone is every shades, as I remember the Brazilians saying, everyone's different colors. It's what matters on the inside. But I also knew that there was a definite, in the settler community, there were French Canadian in origin and Anglophone English Canadian. And I was seen as British. But I kept thinking, I'm not really British, because actually, technically, I'm not. I was born here, I sound very English, but that's because I went to school when I came back from Brazil to make sure I understood English, because I forgot English. When I had to relearn when I was like 8.
Oh, wow.
So I know that you can learn an accent. So I used to find it funny, because funny is not funny, haha, but funny strange, because Canadian people who are white Anglos in Kenora would say, "Oh, but you're English, you think like this," and I kept thinking, that's a huge presumption, because you've assumed, based upon the way I speak and the way I look, I'm going to be behave in a certain way and have a certain bunch of attitudes. And I know this happens the world over, but I think I kept thinking, here I am, I'm training to be an archaeologist, which is about collecting data, understanding the past, and understanding and it means understanding the past of a community and a region and a nation and identity, and working out who people are. And usually the people like to know where they come from in order to work out where they're going to. And because it makes people like to know who they are.
That's really important, and I think this also kind of sets us up to discuss what happened next in your career. So you had the sense of how to communicate with people, and then you used that to build your experience working in Kenora. So then where did you go next? Did you go back to grad school? Did you go back to the field? Did you do both? What were your, how did you build on those lessons learned?
Okay, that was my first, I was an undergrad, and so it was my first field experience. So I went back to school, and then came back again, did some more field work, then went back again. So I'd go backwards and forwards. I'd go from Kenora, like sort of northwestern Ontario, because I was only based in Kenora. It's usually out in the back of beyond. I couldn't even say, oh, I'm in between this road and that road, and there's a river there, I'm down that river somewhere. And often I knew where I was on the map, but it's very difficult to explain to someone, friends who say, well, where are you? And I'm like, well, I went up a logging road by 92 kilometers, then we turned left, there's a bridge, and then we went down the bridge and down this river. And so it was like, you're in the back of beyond. But it wasn't someone, it was from their perspective, it was the back of beyond. So I'd go backwards and forwards between London and northwestern Ontario. And then I was like, well, I finished my degree, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? That inevitable question, when you finish your undergrad degree and go, that was great, don't know what I'm going to do. And I did. I sort of thought,
we all know
yeah, I think everyone knows it. It's like, so I thought, yes, okay, I could do grad school, but am I actually putting off the evil day, which is another reason some people go to do grad school? I am aware of that. Or do I do something else? And I played around with the idea of becoming a lawyer, human rights lawyer, actually.
Okay.
I quite liked the idea, and I remember I did look into it, and I even filled out some forms. And I thought, yeah. And I had a couple of friends who were doing it, and I thought, sounds good. But I was like, I kind of like archaeology. I like the potential it could offer. Maybe what is it going to go down to? And I thought, I don't want to be an academic for the rest of my life, because it doesn't really appeal. I like the idea of teaching. I enjoy that. And as a quick pause,
you are currently an academic, yes?
Research. I'm a freelance researcher.
Freelance researcher. So you're an academic in a sense.
In a sense, yeah, in a sense, in a sense. So I thought, yeah. So I applied to grad school, and I did a year in England, and I realized I didn't really get on with the intellectual approach of the academics. And I thought, doesn't bode well. So I withdrew, which I know a lot of people never talk about these things. I did. And then I was looking at who do I work with? And I was like, I don't know. And I talked to a couple of people, and I came across this guy in McGill, and I wrote to him and said, hi, thinking I have no clue who he is. Hello, I like your article. Is it possible to do a PhD? And my usual, do you know who you're talking to? In my sort of, maybe I should have actually looked, but I didn't. I liked the way he wrote. He talked about different intellectual perspectives. And so I thought, well, why not? So I wrote him an email and said, hi, I really like your article. Would it be possible to do a PhD, a master's PhD or something like that? And he wrote back saying yes. And I thought, well, that was pretty easy. Yeah, a bit naive in retrospect. But
I was going to say, was it easy?
No. It was actually really hard. But I don't know. Yeah, no. What was going through my head? I don't know. I just thought, well, I liked the way he wrote. And I thought, if you're going to have to work with somebody, you have to like the way they write, and you have to... He was able to... What struck me as an article, he published it in 1982. I know it's quite old, but he had 3 different points of view. And I thought, interesting. You've got 3 different perspectives operating, and he'd compared them all. And I thought, I think I quite like that idea, that you could have 3 different perspectives being discussed in the same article. It's only 9,000 words. It's pretty impressive. So I thought, I might be able to learn something from this.
And so to clarify, this is when we talked about you initially thinking you were pursuing a PhD in archaeology, and then the same professor says, let's try ethnohistory.
Yeah, so he said...
So he baited switched.
Oh, he did, because he said, oh, come in and do archaeology. And I was like, okay, yeah. So I did. He's like, I'm both. You can do both. So I was like, oh, okay. He's like, you can be like me. I'm an archaeologist and an ethnohistorian. And he is. Well, he's dead now, but he was. So that's what happened. So my committee was like filled out with ethnohistorians and historians and archaeologists.
And so now I think we're coming upon the crux of something that you and I have talked about pre-recording, which seems to be the crux and at the heart of everything you do, which is understanding others, holding multiple viewpoints, and then, breaking down those barriers that may exist when we hold different viewpoints. You'd mentioned in our email correspondence that this was critical to you and something you wanted to talk about. So was this something that you uncovered further as you embarked on your career in ethno history? I uncovered it. It was one of the things I wanted to do when I came in and did as an archaeologist. So technically, I'd consider myself both. And I wanted to say, okay, we've got a body of data, and we've got these things called philosophical viewpoints, which we all have. And there are different theories which operate within particular intellectual frameworks. And I said, we know, because obviously, grad school, you have to review all the literature. You discover all these people who use different points of view, and they take different theories. And I said, well, what happens if you have the same body of data and you apply the same intellectual theories and frameworks to the same body of data? What happens? You get a different result. And I thought that's actually really interesting. So biases shape our research is kind of what you were, discovering as you went along. Yeah.
So I discovered that, and I said, look, it's really, and I was modeling it using computing. And so saying, look, this is what's happening. And then I discovered when I was using something called the post-processual approach, which is really popular in archaeology, I was like, I have real problems going from the data and applying the theory and then getting to the conclusion. I can't show the connection. And my supervisor was like, well, yeah, okay, now we have to think and apply differently. So this is where now let's done that. You realize there's some problems. Let's rethink this and combine archaeology and ethnohistory. So that's when it sort of because I had already been doing ethnohistory with ethnohistorians side by side. So I was looking at collections of tales collected by different early anthropologists or early travelers up in northern Cree, just to sort of, okay, well, what am I dealing with? How do I look at it? What do I think about? Okay, I'm trying to find a framework here. There's a structure. So that's when in one sense, the project I was doing as an archaeologist sort of keeled over and went splat on the floor. This is not going to work. And I was like, oh, great. Wonderful, what do I do? Your usual grad stuff, and you're like, oh my god, my life is falling apart. But it's not really. But technically, the problem seems to be sort of driving. And then I use experimental intelligent agents, which are pattern matching. So that would be machine learning, really. So and sort of experimental AI, and I was like, oh look, let's see if we can see. The reason being, as a lot of the archaeologists were talking about, images operate in combinations. You should be able to find patterns. So I thought, fine, I'll test it. Since the human brain can't remember everything, and if I had 26 sites, so each of them had up to 31 images, I can't remember all of that and sort through all of that. So I thought, I'll try experimentals. Some experimental computing science should be fun. The computer scientists are like, this is great. This is fun. So we're all going to have some fun. It was actually hard work. But it was fun because I realized it's all about how you collect the data. And the importance of perspective and the structures that are influencing the questions that you ask and the frameworks you're asking and the data you're collecting is actually going to influence the outcome. Because I had negative data for the end of the experiment with the intelligent agents. And the computer scientists were like, this is great from our perspective. But we don't think the archaeologists or the ethnohistorians are going to like this. They were right, actually, because the archaeologists are like, what have you done? And I'm like, well, I think it says something about how much data we're collecting, the size of the area that we consider as large, and have we actually spoken to the people who created them? No.
Right, so you're studying with them from a biased filter, without necessarily understanding all the viewpoints.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, this is actually telling us a lot about how if I put my head as an archaeologist on, this is how we're telling us how we're thinking about, we've got to recognize our biases here. So I actually wrote my thesis from the point of view of an archaeologist because I couldn't speak because of various different reasons to the local communities. But I was like, we are talking to the people to whom they belong. And we need to. And so I realized I was actually going down the track more of a sort of ethnohistorian, but I still know the archaeologists they've got an angle. There's a point. In some cases, we will never be able to speak to the people who created them because it's just not possible anymore because they've died. Mm-hmm. So, or there isn't a continuation in the oral information. There isn't any cultural continuity, so we have to admit that. So I think I probably combine the two, but more recently I'm doing more ethnohistory because I know that you have to sort of chop and change. You have to move. So yeah, I'd say that research at McGill is just like, sometimes it was just terrifying because I was like, what have you done? Oh well, it was fun though.
Well, it's fascinating because it's so interesting because you started out with this intuitive understanding of people, and then you made it so technical. You took computational science into understanding various indigenous histories, various cultures, and then you identified the biases. It's so interesting how you took two different routes, experiential and very, very empirical, and used them both to understand people and cultures better. So it's almost poetic in how you explored the same theme in two different ways.
I have thought of that. Yeah.
So as we get to the last stretch, I have a couple more questions I want to ask you. So where are you today? What are you doing with your work today? Where in the world does this take you?
Now I'm actually I'm busy been planning another X trip because I've been working with a knowledge leader, I think you call him an elder, from Laxall, who invited me because he found me. I talked about him briefly in the ECAD talk. He actually found me via academia.edu, and it was and then he sent me an email saying, "Hi, I'd like to chat to you." And I was like, "Oh, hi," which is not the usual way. And we've been working together now for about a year and a bit, looking at a rock painting, and he's talking about what do the images mean, which is really exciting because normally archaeologists and ethnohistorians and everybody else have to guess based upon ethno-associated ethnographic data. So I've been working on that, and we're just about to submit an article, and I've been applying for funding to do some fieldwork actually at the there in Laxall in Northern Ontario. I've also just published with a team of editors next issue of Exploration Revealed, which is exciting, and now we're busy sort of putting together, sort of identifying sort of potential people and saying, "Hi, would you like to write an article for the next issue?"
So there's no shortage of things on your list of things to do, is what you're saying.
No, there's no shortage, and there's I can think of lots of other projects and I'd like to do, and it's just like time, but no, there are lots of things. I mean, I'm always up for going somewhere different. Yeah.
And so as we wind up here, there's a few key lessons that I think our audience who also, are of the expedition crowd, who deal with, who interact with, live amongst, care for, provide for populations all over the world. So maybe as we get to the last few minutes here, we can talk about key insights that you've learned when it comes to building bridges, building rapport, identifying differing mindsets maybe when you first encounter and start living with a new culture, and then how you have, embraced identifying different viewpoints and then building that understanding and rapport.
Tough question. Not easy. That's, I think listening, and I just don't mean that easily. I mean really listening, because I think we say listen, but in often the important bits at the end of the conversation. And it might seem as if the person who's talking to you, especially if they're in another group, that they'll say things repeatedly, and it's the last bit that's got the important stuff. And be prepared to be told, have your leg pulled. And be prepared to realize that you can't take yourself seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm quite happy to have my leg pulled, and I know I have loads of times. And be prepared also to realize that your preconception may be utterly wrong.
Absolutely. And you were saying that, you often get branded as the British person in the group when you certainly feel, and by your background, you're probably more Brazilian than British.
So I think, and be prepared that people have preconceptions about each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be wrong. Actually, I think, ego can get in the way of a lot of things. And that always be realized that we can learn from the other. I mean, I've learned loads. I think it came out of a PhD, not actually thinking I knew an awful lot, but actually I learned so much in the field and with people. And in ways, I learned a lot more just from the little sort of encounters that I had. And I mean, it sounds sort of off the cuff flippant, really, but it's not. I think I've learned an awful lot just by listening and talking and watching and realizing when someone might be doing something fairly, which is, like baking cake or something like that. But they're actually sharing part of themselves, and I'm learning a lot. And that's actually, it's meant the boundaries between outsider and insider are actually loose. They're not hard. And I think that's what we have to realize. And I think sometimes the literature, which, academic literature is great for, academic articles, really, but it doesn't always help us as people trying to understand and work with other people, which we're trying to do.
There is so much gold in what you've said, and I think wherever you are in the world, when you're interacting with another culture, this is universal advice. Listen, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and make mistakes, be made fun of. Seek for those commonalities. Check your ego at the door. Whether you're on a medical deployment to a remote village in a conflict zone, whether you're building science as a ethnohistorian and archaeologist, I think these are universal lessons. And so thank you very much for sharing them with our audience today. This is going to be valuable for so many listeners. For anyone who wants to connect with you online or find out more about your work, where can we find you?
You can find me on my Twitter account, which is Colson_Alicia. You can find me on my Instagram, which is Alicia_Colson. Very unoriginal, I'm afraid. And I have a website. So just sort of Google me. I'm very easy to find, actually.
Perfect. Yeah. And your website, you were saying?
Yeah, my website is actually, I think it involves Alicia Colson and Wix, but I can't remember exactly. My name escapes me now, but it's along the combination of that. You'll find it. There's only one, so there's only one of me.
Perfect. There you have it. Key lessons and insights on understanding different cultures, new cultures, building bridges, building rapport in a very unique and awarded and storied career with Dr. Alicia Colson, EC50 of 2022, one of 50 explorers changing the world that you need to know about, ethnohistorian, archaeologist. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated it. It was an incredible opportunity and a big privilege.
Wonderful. And we will see you next time. And listener, we will see you at the next WEMcast podcast.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the World Extreme Medicine podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. And if you want to meet lots of other risk-taking, rule-bending, and inspirational people, then you need to be in Edinburgh on the 19th to the 21st of November for this year's conference. Tickets are on sale now. Go to extrememedicineexpo.com to find out more.